Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about one of Nashville's most high-profile cases that I had never heard of before. And with the amount of missing children's cases out of Tennessee right now, a lot which are high-profile, I think it's very important to talk about some older cases that still haven't been solved. Because if current cases like the Sebastian Rogers case or Summer Wells case don't get solved, they could eventually turn out like today's case. And I'd hope that for those cases, we'd still be talking about them as well. So that is the point of today's case, to hopefully highlight a case that hasn't been talked about in a while and hopefully bring some new eyes to it. 13-year-old Tabitha Tuders was born on Valentine's Day in 1990 to her mother Deborah and her father Bo Tuders. She also had two older siblings, a sister named Jamie and a brother named Kevin. She grew up in East Nashville and was described as an extremely friendly young girl who was excelling at school, especially in her language arts class. About 6 months before she disappeared, Tabitha had started attending church with her best friend's family, and soon she was singing in the East Highland Baptist Church choir and regularly volunteering at spaghetti dinners. The Sunday before she disappeared, she won a $20 prize for memorizing her 10 commandments at church. Another story that was told about Tabitha is that one time she wanted to learn how to make her mother's homemade biscuits without anyone helping her. So she spent the entire afternoon studying the recipe, figuring out how to make them, and then she ended up serving them at dinner that night, which I think is a really cute story to tell. And Tabitha seemed to be extremely friendly. She ended up befriending an elderly neighbor who she called Grandma, and she'd go over to Grandma's house every few days during the week. There was another story that one time a neighbor's AC broke, and she actually invited that neighbor along with all of her dogs to come and stay at her home so that they could escape the summer heat. Her mother Deborah sang, and I quote, "Tabitha, she had a good heart, a big ol' heart," end quote. And Tabitha had friends, but she wasn't described as boy crazy or anything. It said that she had never had a boyfriend and there wasn't any boys that she was talking about. And when her closest friends would come over to sleep over, they would listen to music, play in her room, play video games, stay up late, the typical things a young teenage girl would do with her friends. And even though she was 13, she had just turned 13 recently. Her room was still filled with stuffed animals and girly things. She really still seems like a little girl at heart. In the early morning of April 29th of 2003, Deborah would wake up to find Tabitha curled up at the end of their bed, which was something that she would often do. They didn't know why. They essentially just thought it was because she wanted to feel closer to her parents, because she did have her own room that she could sleep in. However, often she would come and sleep at the foot of her parents' bed. Deborah got up and got dressed to go work at Tom Joy Elementary School, where she worked as a cafeteria cook, and she made sure to be quiet so that she wouldn't wake her husband and daughter. Deborah sang, and I quote, "I didn't know that was going to be my last time looking at her," end quote. Tabitha's father, Bo, woke up not long after that, around 7 a.m., and he had to get ready that morning because he worked as a short-haul truck driver. Before he left, he ended up waking Tabitha up, saying, and I quote, "I woke Tabitha up, told her I loved her, and I'd see her this evening. She said, 'Okay, Daddy, I love you,'" end quote. After this, Bo headed out the door and Tabitha got up to get ready for school. However, it would turn out that Tabitha wasn't alone in the home because her older sister Jamie actually lived at home with her two young children. However, they were reported to have been sleeping all morning. So Tabitha got ready for school as she always did and then headed out the door of her home at 1312 Lillian Street around 7:50 a.m. to walk to her bus stop, which she had to catch around 8 a.m. This is a route that Tabitha took every single morning to go to school, and her bus stop was only a couple blocks from her home. A witness would later report seeing Tabitha on Boscobel Street, which was only a 3-minute walk around the corner from her home. Tabitha was last seen wearing mud jeans, a light blue shirt, and Reebok sneakers. Other witnesses would later report seeing Tabitha walking uphill on 14th Street towards Boscobel. Another witness, who was a television repairman, would also report seeing Tabitha as he looked at his front door that morning. And he noticed Tabitha strolling down the hill with a half sheet of paper that she was looking at. And it's thought that this paper might have been a report card because she had just gotten it and she had gotten straight A's, and so she was very proud of her report card. The repairman saying, and I quote, "She was walking real slow, reading some papers. It didn't look like she was in a hurry. Then I just closed the door, and that's it," end quote. Another neighbor named Anthony Manning would later tell police he witnessed Tabitha walking in a suspicious manner that morning. So as you can see, there are a lot of different sightings of Tabitha that morning. It was 8 a.m. People were probably getting up for work. They were going to sit on their porch to drink their morning coffee. So there was a lot of activity in that area that morning, yet somehow all these witnesses seen Tabitha, yet she vanished in front of their eyes essentially. And all of these witnesses also seemed to have different recounts of what she was doing. Because as the day passed and 4 p.m. rolled around, Tabitha wouldn't return home from school. Normally, she would run through the door, very eager to tell her mother about her day. Deborah would end up getting home before Tabitha, so she would always be waiting around for Tabitha to get home. And when Tabitha didn't return home, it was very odd because she was a very responsible little girl. She didn't go off, after school without telling anyone. She would always come home. So it was very concerning when she didn't. But of course, when something happens, you don't immediately jump to like the worst case scenario. So at first, Deborah thought maybe the bus was late or there's a possibility that Tabitha was dawdling along from the bus stop. So Deborah ended up leaving her home and walking over to the bus stop to see what the holdup was. However, the bus stop was deserted. There was no one there. Next, she thought maybe Tabitha had missed the school bus for some reason, and so she ended up driving over to Bailey Middle School, where Tabitha went to school. However, when she arrived there, all the doors were locked and no one was there. So Deborah returned home, anxiously waiting for her daughter to arrive home with some kind of excuse as to why she was late. However, when 5 p.m. rolled around and Bo returned home and Tabitha still wasn't there, the couple ended up driving back to Bailey Middle School and aggressively banging on the doors, hoping someone would be there that could give them answers. Finally, a janitor would come to the door and allow them to come inside, and so Bo and Deborah ended up searching up and down the halls, thinking maybe Tabitha had somehow got stuck in a room or something. There had to be a reasoning why their daughter hadn't come home. Maybe for some reason, for the first time in her life, she'd gotten in trouble. Maybe she had a detention or something. However, they would finally run into a teacher. And when they asked this teacher where Tabitha was, the teacher would end up telling them that Tabitha hadn't been at school all day, which is extremely alarming that the school never contacted her parents the moment she was absent. But I know this did happen in 2003. Maybe for some reason the school didn't have that kind of system, which I don't know why they never would. But I know there have been improvements made over the years after situations like this have happened where parents are notified immediately, but we still see some cases nowadays where parents aren't notified immediately, which is still crazy. But back in 2003, it wasn't happening, it seemed, or at least for some reason in Tabitha's case, it didn't. Which, if Tabitha was so routine, I don't know why they wouldn't immediately call her parents. It wasn't like she was a bad student. It wasn't like she skipped school. If she wasn't there that day and the parents didn't give, a reasoning, maybe she had a doctor's appointment or something, that should be a red flag. That's the most concerning thing about this, is that the school never called the parents. The instant a child isn't at school, the parents need to be informed so that the ball can start rolling and they can figure out what the situation is. Because this meant that Tabitha had last been seen at 8 a.m. and she wouldn't be reported missing until 6 p.m., nearly 10 hours after she had last been seen. That is an incredible amount of time that if someone had kidnapped her, for them to have gotten away with her. They could have taken that little girl anywhere. And to put it into perspective, if Tabitha had been kidnapped around 8 a.m. that morning, especially by someone who didn't live in the area, they could have driven 3 states away in that time frame. Or they could have driven all the way to Canada before she was even reported missing. And that is really scary when you look at something like that. After calling 911, it would take 45 minutes for police to arrive at Tabitha's home. And now her parents had the job to try to convince the police that this was serious. Because as we see in so many of these cases, police want to immediately jump to the child just ran away on their own free will. However, Tabitha was an incredible student who loved school, so there was absolutely no reason she would want to skip school, and she loved her family. There seemed to be no issues at home. She overall seemed like a very happy little girl. Even all of the neighbors that Tabitha had been friendly to and would go and talk to and go over for dinner with and hang out with, all her neighbors on her street knew her because she was such a friendly, happy little girl. And all of them also agreed that Tabitha wouldn't have ran away. However, it would be 2 hours before police would begin canvassing the area. By now, the sun was going down and 15 officers would arrive to start canvassing a 2-mile radius overnight around her home. But remember, as I said, if there was a kidnapping involved here, if Tabitha had been kidnapped or some sort of foul play had happened, that person had 10 to 12 hours on the police, and the police were only searching a 2-mile radius around her home. Really put that into perspective. They could have driven to Canada, and police were only searching 2 miles around her home. That is extremely scary. It was essentially going to be like finding a needle in a haystack. Police would inform the media around 10 p.m. that night about Tabitha's disappearance. However, an Amber Alert was not issued, and this most likely was because they didn't have any proof that she was kidnapped, and you need some kind of proof of an abduction to release an Amber Alert. You need a description of an individual that kidnapped the child or person. You need a vehicle description. There are all of these parameters that you have to go around to be able to even put an Amber Alert out, which I think extremely hinders investigations like this, because there should be some kind of system where if a child goes missing, it gets blasted everywhere regardless of the information, just so people can be looking out for the child. Even if they were a runaway, that would be a positive thing because you'd be able to find them faster, because even if a child runs away on their own free will, they are more at risk of being in danger then, so they need to be found quickly. Yet police don't seem to look at it like that. Bo and Tabitha were also out all night trying to help police search for their daughter. And let me tell you, there was a lot of criticism in this case. Because yes, police would go on a search for Tabitha for 3 days straight. However, in the meantime, they were also going on the news telling everyone that they believed that Tabitha was simply a runaway. Yet, if they had just done a little bit of research, like I just gave you all, you would realize that Tabitha was the opposite description of a runaway. Unless they had some kind of information that's not known to the public about her private life, where maybe there was something going on at home that would have caused her to run away. But from everything that we do know and see, it's the opposite of that. She was a happy kid. She was very friendly, which is sometimes extremely dangerous because that means the child may be more trusting, unfortunately. But she also loved school. There was no reason she would have skipped school. She had never skipped school before. She was going to church and singing in the choir there. Like, she seemed to be an all-around amazing little girl. Not a little girl that would have ran away. On top of that, as I just mentioned, if a child did run away on their own free will, that means they're at higher risk of something bad happening to them, so you should find them as soon as possible. So I don't know why police go around saying, oh, well, they ran away, and then they don't go look for them. That should be even more incentive to go look for them, which I don't understand. The thought process behind that, where they're just like, oh, they ran away, so it's their fault. So who the hell cares what happens to them then? No, they're a child. If they can't consent to a number of things, they shouldn't be able to just consent to run away. If you get what I mean, like, the police shouldn't just be like, okay, it's fine then. We don't need to go look for them or look as hard. Like, excuse me, it just boggles my mind. On top of that, not only because of the narrative behind who Tabitha was, but she also left that day with just the clothes on her back and her backpack with her school supplies. She didn't have any money. She had left her $20 bill that she had won at church behind even, so if she was going to run away, you'd think she'd at least take $20, which isn't going to even go very far. She didn't have a place she could have went to. There are so many things involved with this that just don't make sense why police would just think it was a runaway. There seemed to be no signs. She didn't pack clothes up to go run away. She didn't take money. There was nothing like that. Yet police were going to the media telling them that they didn't think that she was kidnapped and they thought she was just a runaway. But hey, I will play devil's advocate. The police were essentially screwed in this case because it did take so long to report Tabitha missing that there was a 10 to 12 hour lead before they started even investigating. I'll give them that. But in the aftermath, to essentially blame the 13-year-old girl for going missing, saying she ran away, and then also to blame the parents, I didn't tell you that, they were also blaming the parents, saying they were the reason that the investigation was going so slow. It's honestly just pretty messed up in my opinion, and just lazy police work. However, as I've already told you, there were a lot of witnesses and sightings that morning of Tabitha, and multiple other tips would also flood in. Police realized, however, pretty quickly on that the area that Tabitha and her family lived in East Nashville, as well as her route to the bus stop, was filled with everything from PDF-iles to ex-cons to other nefarious people, all of whose names would end up in police files later on. And things really did seem to be at a standstill until one very crucial tip came in from another witness that I haven't told you about yet. And this is a tip from a young boy who was waiting at the bus stop that Tabitha was walking towards. This little boy would claim that he witnessed Tabitha walking towards him at the bus stop when a red car would pull up alongside her when she was halfway down the hill. Now, this little boy then claims that Tabitha stopped, talked to the person in the vehicle, and then got inside the vehicle with this person, which the car then turned around and went back up the hill. The boy claimed that he seen the driver and that the driver was a black male with a baseball cap on. There was also additional information that the car may have been green.
Metro Cold Case Detective Stephen Jolly is tracking a new lead in the case.
There was some schoolmates that one of the detectives spoke with who mentioned that this individual said he saw her get in a green car. But I don't think the detectives ever were able to find out who he was.
Jolly recently tracked down that former schoolmate.
He described the green Mustang in detail. He said it was a 90s model green Mustang and that it had a scorpion decal on the back that was white. He even said the size of the decal. He said it was about 2 inches wide, 3 inches tall, in the center of the rear window, about 3 inches down from the roof. So he gave a lot of details, so that makes, that made me think that I'd like to get that out there.
And you would think, great, this is the smoking gun that this case needed. This is what police were looking for this whole time, especially since this individual would have had such a lead on them that they'd be chomping at the bit for this information. However, considering this was the only lead they had, Police shut it down very quickly, saying that they didn't think it was a credible tip, and they honestly didn't really do much looking into this tip, it seemed like, which again is another level of crazy to me. I never seen a reason. I don't know if they thought it was just because he was young, so they didn't believe his version of events, which I don't know why a little kid would even lie about something like that. I don't know if they had a different alibi for him, which they said for someone else we'll talk about later that that person's story didn't match up, but they didn't say this little boy's story didn't match up. This little boy's story actually, which we'll get a lot more into, is the only thing that truly does make sense, and there are dots that connect to it. Yet police, for some reason, don't want to believe this. Don't know if it's because they didn't want to put in the effort to have to try to find that, and they just wanted to think she ran away so they didn't have to really look much. I don't really know. I would truly like to know though, because in my opinion, just from this little information that I've talked about so far, the police were really pissing me off researching this. And I understand how all cops are bad, yada, yada, yada. I talk a lot about how I even have an old friend who is a police officer in Canada. So I don't think all police are bad. But when you look at a case like this and look at the information laid out and how things were happening, it can piss you off. It pisses me off because there are just things that I'm like, why wouldn't you put more effort into looking into that, especially in hindsight with what the information that we now have? It's mind-blowing. And overall, the investigation just seemed to be a slow one. Meanwhile, a week after Tabitha disappeared, the Sean Hornbeck Foundation, a Missouri-based missing children's organization, arrived to help with scent dogs. The dogs would end up tracking the route that Tabitha took to the bus stop from her home. However, halfway down the hill, the dogs would end up stopping and reversing back up the hill, indicating that Tabitha didn't walk any farther. This was also the exact spot that the little boy claimed that Tabitha got into a vehicle. Yet, as I said, police for some reason weren't doing much with this information, and Tabitha's parents were insisting that Tabitha wouldn't have gotten into a vehicle with a stranger. Police saying, and I quote, "We're not saying the boy lied or that it's a misstatement. We've just never been able to corroborate his story as fact." End quote. And as I mentioned, the area where Tabitha lived was a hot spot for predators. Just 2 weeks after Tabitha vanished, a husband and wife were arrested on Lillian Street for essaying a minor, and their home was just a couple houses down from Tabitha's house. There was also Millard Earl Smith, a registered PDF-file who would later be arrested in June of 2003 after luring a young boy onto his motorcycle, driving him to a secluded area, and then attempting to essay him. Millard would also go on to essay a woman after kidnapping her from a Greyhound bus station. After this, a relative of a man would go to the Tudors and tell them that police needed to look into him because he had actually essayed 4 of his daughters. So police would end up questioning this man, and his name is Leslie Paul Duke, who had spent more than a decade in prison for essaying his 4 daughters, and yet another predator who was living not far from Tabitha's home. Another person of interest was 22-year-old Ernest Fred Brown, who allegedly admitted he was a crack-addicted thief with psychological problems. However, he denied abducting Tabitha. 2 months after Tabitha vanished and still hadn't wandered back home like police were hoping for, they finally set up a command center at LP Fields. They brought in search dogs and carefully looked up and down the residential streets one by one. Yet still not much seemed to happen from this, especially after all this time had passed. However, there was yet another witness that police were looking into. This man was a local maintenance worker that police were looking into. He claimed he was driving a boy to the local Stratford High School when he witnessed Tabitha walking to the bus stop. However, according to police, his story allegedly didn't line up, and he didn't have a legitimate reason for being in the area of Lillian Street that day, which makes me wonder, why are they looking so heavily into some things but not into others? However, this man seems to just be a creep overall, because he would allegedly go on to speak to a reporter. And during this conversation, he would end up going on to describe how Tabitha had been developing, and he used his hands to describe this, which is, it's just disgusting. And again, it seems like yet another PDF file probably living in the area, unfortunately. Police would end up declaring him an active person of interest in the summer of 2003. His home was actually only a 3-minute drive from Tabitha's home, and police would go on to aggressively search it with luminol. However, no evidence seemed to be found. In January of 2004, a new police chief was elected, and this is when Tabitha's case was finally moved to top priority. A veteran detective was also assigned to Tabitha's case to work on it solely. There was no other cases he was working on, only Tabitha's, and he did this for 15 months straight. Yet here we are in 2024, and there are still no answers for her family. Over the years, several theories have come up, such as Tabitha was drugged and forced into trafficking. One man in particular was actually looked into who had actually been involved in prostitution in the East Nashville area, and he was serving a lengthy sentence in federal prison. However, no charges were ever laid on that man either. A note would end up being found with Tabitha's school things that had been handwritten by Tabitha. On the note, the initials TDT were written, which were Tabitha's initials, along with another set of initials of MTL. However, the MTL initials were never identified. It's never been figured out. There's been theories that maybe it was someone she had a crush on at school, which I don't know why police wouldn't just go through all the school records then, find all the people that have the initials MTL and ask them. I don't know if maybe they did do that and nothing just came of it, but it's not been talked about if it had been done. It does make me question, however, was it possibly someone at church? Because she seemed to attend church with her friend. Her family wasn't involved with her going to church. So is it possible there was someone, maybe even a girl that was a friend at the church that she liked? Maybe it was a new friend at church. Maybe it was someone older that she was talking to at church that was trying to be friendly towards her, and she was writing these initials down. There's a lot of ways my mind go, because I wonder if police ever even looked into anything like that, especially since church was a new thing in her life. Going there, it was pretty recent to her disappearance. So could she have possibly ran into someone nefarious at church? In August of 2020, police would end up searching a 7-acre property off Black Piney Road in Hickman County that was connected to a person of interest in Tabitha's disappearance. This man goes by the name of Albert Franklin, who actually owned a bar in the area. Articles reading, and I quote, "A spokesperson for the police department explained that the search was based on a theory and several old and new tips indicating Tabitha may have been on the property in the 2003 timeframe. The search was focused on a wooded area near a small decaying house." End quote.
Yeah, the unfortunate part about this, Amy, investigators still don't have any answers for the family. Their home is here right behind me here in East Nashville. You can see a banner still hangs in front of it with a picture of Tabitha on it. They don't want her story forgotten. And after that 2-day search of a property in Hickman County, Metro Police were not able to find any evidence that Tabitha was even there, but they still haven't ruled it out, though. It was a tip that led police here. Sky 5 was overhead as investigators looking through that property for evidence linked to her disappearance in 2003 when she left home to go to her bus stop and was never seen again. We now know the property has ties to former Nashville bar owner Albert Franklin, who sources say has been a longtime person of interest in the case, but never officially called a suspect. Investigators also searched an RV that has been parked at a business for more than a decade in Dixon. They say there could be a connection between that RV and Franklin. Now, right now, Franklin is in federal prison for drug and firearm charges. He has denied any involvements in this case.
However, despite how thoroughly police were searching this property, nothing was once again found. Now, the biggest red flag in this case that got me involved Tabitha's own family. Well, sort of. Tabitha's older sister, Jamie, who was living at the home when she disappeared, turned out to have a boyfriend that had gotten off of work around 7 a.m. that morning. This boyfriend had actually lived in the Tuders' home for several months, meaning Tabitha not only knew him well, but would have trusted him. This also meant that he most likely would have known Tabitha's routines and also where she went to the bus stop that morning. And get this. Not only was he off work that morning at 7 a.m., but he also drove a red car and matched the description that the little boy gave police. On top of that, after Tabitha disappeared, this boyfriend didn't help search for some reason, even though Tabitha's entire family was searching, which is all just extremely odd to me. You think? The one theory that police aren't looking into, and they're going to do all these other PDF files and all of these other avenues and saying she ran away on her own free will, yet we have a witness who claims to have seen her getting into a car right where Track Dog stopped. And then we have a person of interest who was close to the family, who would have known exactly where Tabitha got picked up by that school bus, who drove the exact car and had the same description of the person the witness seen, who also might have been available that morning to have taken her somewhere. Very odd to me that police weren't going that route. This also makes me wonder, in hindsight, when exactly did Tabitha start sleeping in her parents' bedroom and going in there at night? It makes me wonder if there's a correlation between the boyfriend starting to live at the home and Tabitha doing that. And if there is a correlation with that, it would lead me to wonder if he was essaying her, and if that is why she started going into her parents' room to feel safe. It makes me wonder if there is some kind of tie like this and it's just not being discovered. In 2005, Jamie would also end up telling reporters that she had failed 3 to 4 lie detector tests, but blamed the police for putting too much pressure on her and confusing her, which could alter the tests. But this was all very concerning because Jamie was the only one in the home that day when Tabitha left. But we do have to remember that there were a lot of witnesses that seen her walking, so that would make you think that something didn't happen to her at the home. And Jamie would eventually go on to break up with this boyfriend. On top of that, it would come out that Tabitha's own brother, 24-year-old Kevin Lee Tuders, had been arrested back in 2001 for being part of a Nashville area prostitution ring. He lived at his parents' home back when he had been arrested. However, police were aware of his past but didn't consider him a suspect, and he had since cleaned up his act and started working for a roofing company. So they didn't seem to think that he would have abducted his own sister, which I guess. And I'm not saying that the sister was involved or the brother was involved, because, you can do bad things but not want to do bad things to your family. But just from all of this information that we do know, especially regarding the area in which Tabitha lived, she was surrounded by a lot of very dangerous and bad people. Now, let's talk about the theories, because as I said, there were a lot of theories going around. There's the one very specific one that seems to be a smoking gun and with a lot of red flags. In my opinion, there is no reason that Tabitha would have turned around halfway down that hill to her bus stop, because she knew that she had to be at that bus stop at a certain time. She only had a small amount of time to get there from her house. She had 10 minutes, which was plenty enough time to walk to the bus stop, but to run home to do something else or to go somewhere else, which wasn't like Tabitha. She loved school. It was her favorite place. So there's no reason she wouldn't have gone on that bus, which I think we've established. The only thing in my opinion that makes sense are all of these witnesses, which police seem to be dismissing. There were multiple witnesses who had seen her walking towards her bus stop. Then we have a witness at the bus stop that claims to have witnessed her getting into a vehicle. And as Tabitha's parents said, she would not have gotten into a vehicle with a stranger, which that leads me to think then that the driver must have been someone she knew and trusted, which in my opinion would have been her sister's boyfriend. If he had simply pulled over and asked her something like, hey, do you want to ride to school? I don't see why she would have said no. She knew this man very well, it seems like. He had lived at her home for several months. If that did happen, I don't see why she would have declined that offer or even questioned that offer, considering he was essentially part of her family, which is truly scary if that is what happened. And if this boyfriend did truly do something, that means he had a 10 to 12 hour lead on the police. So I do wonder what his alibi was, where he was that morning after he left work, if police are not looking into him as thoroughly as you think they would, and they're looking down all these other avenues. It makes me wonder why the police can't pin this on him. And if they do, after all this time, think that he did have something to do with it, it makes me wonder if they just don't have a body and that's why they aren't doing anything. They want some kind of evidence before making a big move, because technically, I guess they wouldn't have anything to pin on him other than maybe an alibi that he wouldn't have. But in my opinion, all of this information leads to the boyfriend allegedly doing this. But it just still makes me wonder, if they have this kind of information that they can pin this on someone, why are they dismissing this little boy's story? And it just seems harder to dismiss all of this than to look into it, because you have to dismiss a little boy's story. You have to dismiss the dogs tracking to that exact spot. You have to dismiss that this little boy somehow knew the exact car and what the boyfriend looked like to pin it on him, which why would a little boy even know that exact information? That seems very exact for a little boy to have just made up on the spot and for it to exactly match this boyfriend. One person that Tabitha would have trusted and got into the vehicle of without an argument. It just seems harder to disprove that. Now, of course, if you do want to think alternate theories, it seemed like Tabitha was very friendly and very nice, so there could have been a PDF file in the neighborhood who may have lured her off, maybe a neighbor she did know that offered her a ride. But then you'd think that there would have been a red vehicle sitting in their driveway that people would have looked into then. Again, there was that maintenance worker who seemed kind of creepy, who didn't have a good alibi, it seemed. However, it makes me wonder, did he match to the description of what the little boy gave? Did he drive a red car? Or are police just trying to dismiss the story so they're looking anywhere else? As I also mentioned, maybe there was a possibility that Tabitha befriended someone nefarious at church. Could someone at church drive a vehicle or match that description, that maybe gotten a little too close to a little girl at church that people aren't looking into for some reason? But in my opinion, this information lines up too well to not be the boyfriend. Again, my opinion. I don't even know who this person is, this unknown boyfriend. And I know the police want to dismiss this theory, or maybe at least they used to, but maybe they secretly are looking into it. I'm hoping they are still, because it's just too coincidental to me that this little boy would make up this story that matched exactly to the boyfriend. And I'm hoping it's just because police haven't found her body or any evidence to tie it to him, and that's why they haven't done anything yet. Let me know if you agree with that. But to this day, Tabitha's family still has a sign with Tabitha's information outside of their home. Her parents saying, and I quote, "It's like the earth opened up and she just fell in. It's hard for us to get the 13-year-old girl that we saw last out of our minds. That's how we will always remember her. We want our daughter back so bad, but you just gotta keep faith that one day we will be together. We're not going to give up because I feel like she is still here, but we will be together again in heaven." End quote.
If anybody knows anything, just please come forward and let us know. I mean, I don't want to go another 10 years or so at all.
It's just heartbreaking. It's sometimes it's just hard to explain. It's just it's like part of you's missing, and it never come back until she comes back.
If Tabitha is still out there somewhere, she would now be around 34 years old. Tabitha had freckles, deep blue eyes, and sandy blonde hair. She had a birthmark on her stomach, a scar on her finger, and her ears are pierced. If you have any information on Tabitha's disappearance, I will have the information down below to contact the authorities. If you know something, please say something. Her family needs answers. It has been way too long. I want to know how you all feel about this case. Is there a certain theory that you're swaying towards, or do you know information on this case that I didn't talk about today? Let's have a chat about it down below in the comment section. I will be down there with you chatting. And as always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.